Hey guys, we are in the next lesson in our trig because we combined 9-1 and 9-2 together. We're now doing angles of elevation, angles of depression. But to do those, we still have to use basically everything we did before, our 3 steps and everything. So we just need to remember that the sine of an angle is going to be opposite leg over hypotenuse. We know that the cosine of an angle is adjacent leg over hypotenuse, and that the tangent of an angle is going to be opposite leg over adjacent leg. And so being able to identify those and set up our different parts will be really huge. So we're going to come back and we're going to use those. So these are still key for everything we're doing today. Today we have to define a few things. These are kind of like the word problems that we do with trigonometry, and I think everything in geometry is a word problem because we're always reading what they ask. But I want you to imagine that you have a classmate named Steve, okay? And Steve has got a summer job, and he's been up on the roof because he works on the maintenance crew, and he's having lunch. Now understand, he's safe because he's having lunch. And the reason why he's working is his parents wanted to teach him a lot of responsibility, and they said, if you want a car, you're going to have to work. So he was just out looking at the horizon, so looking straight out, so he's looking out horizontally, and looking and seeing, I can see for miles around, and I can almost see up to Wisconsin on top of this building, and he just loved it. But then he looked down in the parking lot, and there was his car. A Volkswagen Bug. Aren't you so excited? And he looked at it, and he had this direct line of sight. Now he was looking at that car, and he started getting a little envious, and all of a sudden he got a little depressed because he realized there was no way that this summer he was going to raise enough money for that Volkswagen Bug. And so he got a little depressed. So the angle that he works with, because he looked horizontally and then down to the line of sight, is called the angle of depression. So Steve was a little depressed. So how do we define an angle of depression? An angle of depression is the angle formed by looking horizontally, then down to the line of sight. Okay? Now I want everyone to look at this angle right there. I call that the angle of don't do, okay? Because if you looked at the line of sight and then down, he would fall off and it would kill the problem. It would just be bad. I used to call that the angle of suicide, and then I realized that was not politically correct or probably appropriate at my level. So I decided, we won't call that anymore. But now let's imagine Steve had a friend, but he didn't realize his friend, and by this time it's going to be a girl, she was walking to the building because her dad worked there. And her name, so we have Steve and let's have Susie, okay? So Susie, ponytail here, was walking, and then Steve and her were really good friends, so he thought, you know what, now's the time to pull a prank. She has no clue I'm sitting on top of this building. So he yells, Susie, Susie, and she looks. And which way do you look when a person calls your name first? Side to side and straight what? Straight forward. So she had her horizontal line, okay? So she looked horizontally first, all right? Then he kept going, I can't help myself, and he started giggling, and he started going, Susie, Susie, up here. And he looked up, and she had then looked up to his line of sight, and their eyes are now locked, and they're looking at each other, and they have the same line of sight. Now Susie goes, hey, Steve, what are you doing up there? And he goes, hey, Susie, what's up? And he goes, come up here, you've got to see this view. I have a key to the top of the roof here, you can come up. And so she decides, because it's a hot day, that she'd walk into the building and take the elevator to the top. So she went out horizontally and then up to the line of sight, so we're going to call hers the angle of elevation. All right? Now, every way, think about it. How did she look first? She looked horizontally. So the same thing. The angle of elevation is the angle formed by looking horizontally, then up to the line of sight. So hers is going up. So think going up, his is going down. Now what's so special about my two horizontal lines when they looked out horizontally first? They're going to be what to each other? You're right, parallel. And what are so special? What would we call, if we didn't have a special name for those two angles, the angle of depression and angle of elevation? Do you see the Z shape? They would be called alternate interior angles. And so what do we know about alternate interior angles when I have parallel lines? They're congruent, and that's exactly right. Just remember, I can't write the for all of a sudden. The angle of depression will always equal, with the same line of sight, the angle of elevation. It has to be that Z shape because we have the horizontal lines are going to be parallel. Now, one of the first things you have to be able to do is identify angle of depressions and angles of elevation and kind of describe what they're going to be with this one. So here, look where they start. The solid lines are going to be your line of sight. But if I'm up here on the top of the tree, I have to look out horizontally first. Then what would the person or the bird, let's say it was a bird looking down at that person, would have to do? They have to look down to the line of sight. So angle 1 is the angle of depression for that line of sight. Okay? Now, that's like a bird looking down to the person. But if I look at the same line of sight, look at a person's looking horizontally first, then up, let's say at that bird on top of the tree, and then it's going to be up to the line of sight, I know angle 2 is the angle of elevation. And remember, they would be congruent to each other. Now, what if that person looked down at the base of the tree? He looked horizontally first. So his looking down to that line of sight would be an angle of depression. And then, if you're doing the same thing, let's say I was a worm or something looking up at that human, you go horizontally first and then up to the line of sight. So angle 4 is the angle of elevation. So hopefully that kind of gives us some clarity on that, and we're going to actually do some problems on the other page.